This is an introduction to your subtractive or your reductive method project, in which you have to have two forms, one that's real that you're working off of observation and one that's imagined. In this video I'm just going to show you the real object to show you how to work and make your lines and how to actually begin carving the foam that you're going to be using. It's standard house insulation foam. It comes in 4x8 sheets. I've already cut it up into blocks for you and glued them together. You have a 6x6x6 cube. You have an 8x8x6 rectangle in your kits, along with a set of files. You have large flat files where you do your rough work, and then you'll have a lot of needle files where you'll do a bit of your refined work or getting some more definition and edges in your form. You'll be probably using your utility knife again. You'll need a Sharpie, any type of a black marker that you can mark on the foam with will work. And you'll probably be needing a dust mask, and nowadays everyone has a mask of some kind. The stuff that we're working with doesn't get too fine of a particulate, but you definitely don't want to inhale the foam when you're sanding. When you're filing or getting your rough carving, mostly you're going to be dealing with large chunks that come off, so you also want to look at your workspace. You do not want to do this in your bedroom. You don't want to do this in a carpeted area. I'm working in the garage. If you can work in the patio or a covered area outside, that would be optimal. If not, work on a floor with a hard surface that does not have carpet. Because one thing also with this material is that when you're filing or sanding, it develops static cling. So even though you sweep it 4 or 5 times, it might still stick just because of static cling. So keep that in mind as choosing where you want to work just as much as what you want to form. So you do have to have two objects, right? I said one real and one imagined, and you're going to combine those, either morphing or melding them into a singular form or carve them as two separate objects. And in your kit I said you did have 2 blocks. You can carve both objects out of a singular block, or you can carve them out of separate blocks, or if you morph them into a single, that might then amongst itself become a singular form, but informed by 2 different forms. So what I'm trying to get at is you don't have to use both blocks. If you mess up on one, you can use the other, but use the one that fits the scale of your object better. What I've chosen is a little pumpkin, a little plastic pumpkin. It's got lots of contours that we can define through the process of carving. The process of carving is one of the things that you're going to be graded upon, and as is texture and color. So keep those 3 things in mind. The ability to carve, your use of the elements of texture, and the element of color when you paint this in the end. One thing to consider when you're selecting your object or coming up with your design is that foam is easy to carve, but when it gets to be thin, it breaks or it bends really easily. So you can see how thin that was. You don't want to go any thinner than your thumb, or basically about an inch in diameter. So if you're looking at the stem of this, that's probably about the thickness of my thumb. So don't choose an object that has a lot of slender arms or tentacles or appendages that come out, because it will tend to break, and you don't want to give yourself more undue stress than you already have. So keep your forms no thinner than 1 inch or 1.5 inches in the round. Okay. Lastly, in your kit you have sandpaper. We'll be using that towards the end, but to just give you a kind of a general idea, you've got 3 grits in your kit. They're not the same colors, but they're the same grits. We have 120 grit, which means that if you were to measure out 1 inch squared, we'd have 120 little bumps or grains of sandpaper on there. I believe you have 220 in your kit. You measure out 1 inch, there's 220 bumps. So the bigger the number, the finer the sandpaper. The smaller the number, in this case I think this is an 80, the coarser the sandpaper. So this is going to remove more material than your 220. Okay. So I'm working off of the 6x6, and I've taken a Sharpie marker and I've drawn out where the pumpkin resides, including the stem. Okay. Now, when we're dealing, even on the top, you have the stem and then you have the cross contours to define the top edge of that pumpkin coming down. So when we're looking at this subtractive method, sometimes it takes people a while to understand what it is and how to get there by removing material to get to the form. Many people work in an additive fashion, much easier, more intuitively. So some people may struggle with this, and that's fine. Again, we are in school, it's a learning process, that's what we're trying to get through. But one common mistake that I will have when I give the instructions of drawing each side of your form, people will start to carve this side and just carve straight in. And then they'll come to this side and they'll carve straight in. And they come to this side and they carve straight in. So then in the end you're going to have this geometric abstraction of a pumpkin with flat planes on the 4 different sides. That's not really what we're looking for, but that would be the literal interpretation of carve this out. What we're doing here is we're identifying our negative space. Okay? Our negative space being the material that we know is definitely safe to remove. So if I look here on this corner, and I know this is not part of my form, and I know this is not part of my form, and I know that from here to the center point at the top is not part of my form, that means I can safely remove a big chunk of material here. Okay, now there's different ways to go about that. You can come in with your half round file. Files only work when you push, they do not remove any material when you pull back. You might see material move when you pull back because you're pulling back the material that you've already removed when you went forward. So don't waste your effort. Only put pressure when you're going in a forward stroke with the file. Okay. So, like I said, we know nothing resides here. So we can come in and use our file. Again, I said when we are using our file, our chunks are large. We definitely want our mask when we are sanding. Okay. So you can see that it's already starting to come off pretty quickly. But what I want to mention is that many people might have this at home. This is not required. This will probably just save a little bit of time. Is a hacksaw. Okay. So keep your hand out of the moving path. What you can do is line it up there. Well, I know I can remove more than that, but I'm just going to play it safe. Stop there. Come over to this side. And then I'm going to cut in. Okay? So that came off pretty quick. You don't have a hacksaw in your kit, but you do have a utility knife. Okay? Make sure your blade is sharp. I think your knife actually came with 2 or 3 blades that are inside the body or the housing, so if you have a screwdriver you can replace these. Please be careful when you do, but you can remove these and replace them, or at the bare minimum you can turn them around. Again, yours is the closed body, so you'll have to use a screwdriver to open it in the center, but you can flip it over and have a sharper edge. I'm going to come over to this side here because I'm not going to remove a large portion, but I can come in, take my knife, and I can cut some larger pieces off. So you can use your knife to carve a little bit or to make incisions to know kind of where to stop when you're using your files. Okay, again, always cut away from yourself. And one thing I want to say is to be careful with your knife if you cut in and you're actually prying with your blade. We're not applying that much force here, but when you have a blade, it is a harder metal, or it's been hardened. And when metal is hardened, that means it loses its flexibility. So the blade won't bend, it will break and possibly shatter. So you do not want to do that. So if you are prying, making sure that it is very light pressure when you're using that. Okay. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to look at this, and you can see that this line meets this line over here on the edge. So that doesn't mean that I can move just a little bit, right? I can't take off a lot. But when we're looking at our form, there's no like really hard edge where the two parts meet. It's curved, so I need to make sure that my outer edge is curved, right? It is rounded, right? It's not a flat pumpkin. So as we're doing this, I'm slowly coming further towards the center line, so that when you're looking at this from the back, we're getting towards this middle line. So we do have a curve that comes this way and a curve that comes this way, but we never take off more than right in the middle. So when we're looking at this, I need to leave pretty close to this finished surface from this line. I'm just going to make a line right there so you can see it. Normally I'd say don't do that because you won't be able to fill that back in, but that's just a visual aid to kind of show you when I'm doing this, I don't want to go further. And don't worry about that stem line because our stem is not here on this face, it's in the center. So don't worry about removing that piece there. So we're using those drawn lines pretty much just as a visual aid or a guide. Let's come back and look at our form for a second. We're getting the curve, but if you notice it tapers down to the bottom right about here. That's probably about the place where it comes out the furthest, and then it starts to come in at the bottom. So if I were to look at this form, I'd say probably around this line right here is where I start to come back in. So I know I can remove more material here. But not as much right here, but I can remove more over here, based off of the object that I'm working with. And that's why we're saying it's always best to work with an object that you can look at, because what's in front of you is not lying. You don't have to invent. So getting pretty close. So we're getting pretty close there, right? We're getting that curve. We'll probably need to take off a bit more up here. Getting pretty refined right there. I'm just going to come in and take a bit off the top, speed up this video for you a little bit, where the stem resides. And I'm looking at my sideline right here. I know I need to stop right there. I can turn this over. I can follow my edge. Okay, and remember, you do have your knife, you do have your file. You can get through this material quick. So don't worry too much. Rounding that out a little bit. Always making sure to have your object handy so that you can come back and look at it. Curve right at the top. So there we've got pretty close to that profile. We can come in and remove a little bit more, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to show you a few more things now that you've seen how quickly this carves. You might be able to get some of your contours in with the big file, but you can see it's removing large chunks. So you may want to come in with a needle file, choosing a profile that's right for you. We have round, half round, flat, even triangular. But you can see you can start to develop some detail work within that, right? Now's where you're going to need your mask, because we're going to come in and use some sandpaper. You'll notice that your file leaves a little bit of rough bumps. Even when you're using your needle file to get to some incision marks, it sometimes leaves some extra material behind that you don't want in your finished surface. So you are graded on texture. That doesn't mean that everything has to be smooth. It just means you have to have the texture that's right for your object. In this case, I'm dealing with an organic pumpkin, so I probably want to get to smooth, starting with my coarsest sandpaper, going to my medium sandpaper, and then lastly down to my fine sandpaper. Okay, so you can see the surface is already a lot smoother than the other parts where we were sawing or cutting or even using our knife. So I've been working on pretty much one corner. I started to do this corner because it helps me visualize what this looks like in relation to the rest. So don't just start on one part of your foam. Keep turning it, keep looking at it, move it around, and keep carving. Using your knife carefully to cut away from yourself. Be careful when you pry with your knife. That will sometimes snap or break. In that case, definitely be wearing your safety glasses, or even better, don't do that. But you can cut off pieces with that. If you have a hacksaw, that's great. If you have just the hacksaw blade, that still works as well. But primarily, you can do absolutely everything with files. It can just take you a little bit of time. One thing I want to show you before we finish off, I did say that files do get gummed up sometimes, so you can use your file card and clean it off, going with the grain and the direction that the files were created. Okay. Alright, so take your time. Work in a space that you can clean up easily, because you will end up with a lot of fine powder when you're sanding. Wear a mask, but start on paper. Choose your two objects wisely, and as always, ask me questions if you have any. I can guide you through every step of this process, not just when you submit your projects for a grade and then you're looking for feedback. I can give you feedback before that. I hope this video has helped you understand the reductive process and a little bit more about the requirements of this one project.